All right, Nico, can you say, welcome to another episode of Healthy Births, Happy Babies?
It's a happy episode. Happy babies.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Healthy Births, Happy Babies. I'm Dr. Jay Warren, your host, and I'm also a prenatal and pediatric chiropractor here in San Diego. And on today's episode, I'm bringing back a guest that we haven't heard from in quite a while. Well, at least if you are a listener, you haven't heard back from her. I'm in contact with her regularly, but it's our very own Cara Messer. She was one of the original founders, along with Dr. Cap, of the Cap Wellness Center, which we opened back in 2015. And when we launched the podcast, she was on a number of times talking about birth education classes, the importance of doulas, because she is a fantastic birth educator. She, in founding the center, was in charge of our educational program, setting up all of our birth education classes. She now continues to run her own birth education center here in San Diego and is a leader in teaching hypnobirthing. And I brought her back on the podcast because a lot has changed in birth education, not only since we talked years ago, but even more so in this new environment, or relatively new environment, of the pandemic. With a lot of education moving to online, there are differences now. And I brought her on because I wanted her to share her insights as she's pivoted a lot of her classes onto online formats and doing kind of hybrid stuff until we're able to gather again in person for workshops, so that you, with having your questions about the do's and don'ts of online education, getting ready for your birth or getting ready for having your baby, and newborn care, breastfeeding classes, all those kind of things, you can have those answered and just be able to navigate that much better. So I've known Care for years and years, even before the Cap Wellness Center, and I'm part of the Cap Wellness Center because of her. She was our doula and our birth education teacher, our hypnobirthing teacher for my son's birth, and it was through that connection and bond that afterwards, when she and Cap were founding and concepting the Wellness Center, they approached me to be a part of it. And so she's very near and dear in my heart personally because of the role that she's had in my son's birth, but also professionally as we've got together to create the Cap Wellness Center and launch all these amazing things that we do to support families in our community, but also she just is an amazing person. She cares so much about moms and babies and does so much for them with their educational programs and other support programs that I just would love for you to listen to our conversation, and so she can help you directly as well. Hi, Cara. Welcome back to the podcast. It's great to have you back.
Yeah, well, it took you 5 years to get me back on, so.
I know. Well, that's exactly why we're back, is because so much has changed since last time we've talked on the podcast. We've been talking a lot. We've worked on things in the past years, other than us just saying hi right now after 5 years, right?
True. We just don't need to record those conversations because they're
exactly
boring.
Yeah, it's better that way. But this conversation will be a very good one because it wasn't the last episode, but one of your most popular episodes on the Healthy Births, Happy Babies podcast is about birth education, and so much has changed. And I think it's overdue for sure to be able to talk about what education is now, how it's changed, how we can do it better. If it's different and it's not as good, then how can we improve upon it? And that's one in a 5-year span, lots of changes in the world. But then obviously, like at the time of we're recording this, we're almost a year into a pandemic, that things have changed as far as gatherings are concerned. Classes have moved onto line, and it's just different. So I know you've navigated those changes as best as possible, and now we can talk about it for our listeners.
It's mind-blowing how much it's changed. I came from thinking I should do online classes 2 years ago. Maybe we should offer something. And then I thought, how do you teach connection and sexy stuff online? Like, I could not wrap my head around it. And now we've wrapped our head around it and it works really well. But
Yeah.
that push, when it came 2 years ago, I literally thought it was impossible until there was no other way to do it.
Right.
And it's turned out to be phenomenal. So that's part of 2020 I'm really grateful for. But the first 12 weeks, I was not very grateful for it.
Right. I mean, there's so many pivoting that we've had to do, or so much pivoting we've had to do with just how we deliver services, teachings, all this kind of stuff. And I mean, talk about like, so what, maybe like we'll talk about kind of before and after, not that it's ever evolving, of course, but like how the classes are different now versus the traditional way that couples would go through it.
Well, I'm going to do the positives because it's been phenomenal in that parents used to be racing to get to classes, fighting traffic, and they came off their workday stressed out, and it was, oh, he or she's going to be late, or oh, so-and-so's grabbing lunch and dinner and we didn't eat today. And it was really stressful. And so that's how we started off. And sometimes you're waiting for people to trail in. Obviously we have hands-on, we're touching, we're together, we're having bathroom breaks together where we get a little more education, a little more in depth, getting to know families. But now they come home because they're already home. They are in their pajamas because they've probably been in their jammies all day. They have their mac and cheese in their hands. Their dog is on the couch with them. That we keep the videos on because we want to build connection, and everybody's really interactive. And without that decompress stress, they actually decompress from their work day, cuddling and eating what they want and touching their animals. And honestly, that keeps oxytocin and connection going better than if I was sitting in a room with them. Right. So I'm grateful for that part. I didn't think it could be done, and which is dumb because I've taken a lot of online trainings where I've learned cuddle techniques and my sexual coaching training and stuff like that. A lot of that was online and it was phenomenal. My authentic relating training. So it can be done. There was a little bit of shift as far as things to video and get organized.
Right.
And I will tell you this, it literally came to, oh, by the way, on Friday, we're shutting the whole country down, especially California. You can't do anything. And so on Tuesday, we had a day and a half to film breathing, touch, relaxation, birth techniques, comfort measure, like all of these videos where we had to get a pregnant person in the room, everything set up. We're trying to be socially distanced, even though we couldn't really be socially distanced because we were touching. And all of those came together relatively quickly, and they weren't really bad. We've refilmed them since then. Now they're much better. But that allowed us to go online very quickly. And teach what we still have babies. People are still having sex. So we don't have the option of just being like, all right, good luck, you're on your own. Although at the front of the pandemic, it was like that. And a lot of, because everyone is in such fear, a lot of providers were saying, you don't need classes, you don't need doulas, because we're just going to induce you so that we make sure nobody's sick.
Right.
Which was probably some of the worst advice they gave, because families sat in fear the entire time, got no education, and then all of a sudden we're facing an induction and they had no idea what was even going on in their bodies. Right. So it was trauma for a lot of families and a lot of babies. So I saw
that in my practice those first couple months, that because of the fear mindset, people weren't going out and weren't going to the classes, and because of gathering restrictions, and we're talking specifically in California, it was that way. It might not be that way in other parts of the country or the world if you're listening there, but there just wasn't an option, because you pivoted really well in that you had a day and a half and you recorded a bunch to delivered online, but a lot of those classes just got shut down and they weren't available. So couples were going into their births uneducated, not knowing, and in a fear state, because there was all this worry about, and there still is, about like what's going to happen in a hospital setting as far as birthing and exposure risks and the like. So thankfully that has changed, and people like yourself have pivoted. In our wellness center, we've pivoted into online education. But there are a lot of people in that first time birth that are we're on the fence about, do I need birth education anyway?
Absolutely.
now is online. Like, well, I'll just read a bunch of articles and I'll be good. And it's different. It's so different.
It's
And
so
that's
different.
why, I mean, we're always encouraging, like, parents need to take birth education classes so that even for the baby's sake.
Oh, absolutely. And birth education starts before you pee on a stick, in my opinion, because we want to welcome that womb for the baby, for one, clear it of fear and stay in a calm, good mindset. Also have early prenatal nutrition going into our bodies to make sure that lining is ready. So there's a spiritual aspect as well as a physical aspect to that. And we don't know enough about that. We just, oh my gosh, I'm pregnant. Now what? Which actually is the next class that I'm putting out. Because the earlier the education, the better. So when parents find me at 7-8 months, I'm like, who do you know that's pregnant? Well, they just found out. Perfect. That's when I want to talk to them. Because picking a provider early, that's somebody that's going to nurture you instead of scare you the whole time, makes a huge difference in how you're gestating the baby. Your baby feels your fear, your love, your joy, or your scared tactics that scare you. The baby's feeling that, and you're forming their personality. So in order to block out all the pandemic fear or political fear or whatever's happening, we really have to stay focused on my baby's feeling this. So how do I deal with it head on, find solutions so that this pregnancy can be calm for the baby?
Right.
Yes, the parent needs that too, but this is shaping their baby's future, how they see the world, how they trust you, how they trust the world. So I want them before they pee on a stick, but shortly after they pee on a stick, like 10 minutes after, I want them to Google me and let's have a conversation. So we are focusing on education to catch them in the preconception stage, and then that first trimester, because a lot of the medical model still is in the fear mode, and with different variants happening and just different things happening medically, it's much easier to control what you can control. So several hospitals here still aren't doing even their online classes, and they won't be doing physical classes for another year. So when I say some education is better than no education, it is, but you also get what you pay for. So, there's a lot of online education that's just here, watch this class, and you can tell it's a Mod Podge just thrown up, and it's $49 for a reason. Right. It's not going to get you where you need to go. And it's also not going to give you the options and the consent training in order to have conversations with your provider. Right. So there's a lot to education that nobody talks about.
Right. And that's why I love that you're coming out with this new program about, oh my gosh, I'm pregnant. What do I do now? Because especially with things moving and we're so much more online than, if that's even possible, than how we have been in years past, that once a woman does pee on the stick, like, you're Googling everything, right? To find out about, okay, what do I do? Like, maybe it's just searching for a provider, but if there is an offering online that they can find and then help guide them right away, rather than, as you said, waiting until the 7th month, which is better than hitting them afterwards.
Yeah, better than 9 months, 2 days before.
Right. But with, say, like, for couples that have found a birth class, and maybe we need to talk about like what to look for in a birth class. But once they are in an online birth class, like, what are the couples that are getting the most out of it? What are they doing that is different than couples that might have, signed up, been registered, but didn't get as much as they could out of it, and it affected their birth?
Right.
There's a lot of different questions I asked you, but
there are.
We can piece it together.
Where should we start? Let's start with, when you find out earlier rather than later, you're going to start to deal with your fears differently. You're going to start picturing what kind of birth your baby wants, and that will shift everything. If you can just go into the perspective of, my birth already happened. Hopefully my parents didn't screw it up, right? But this baby's birth deserves to be connected, loving, welcoming, and fueled with love. How do I see my baby coming out? What does that look like? So you start with the end result and then work your way back. What kind of provider is going to listen to the different options that I find with researching? whether it be a medical model where you want an induction, a planned cesarean, whatever, you still have a lot of choice around that birth to make it family-centered and connected with your baby, rather than a full medical model where you may not be with your baby because you've added so many interventions that now baby's in the NICU and you're by yourself. Especially with a pandemic, that adds another layer. So the earlier, the better, because there are things you can eat and things you can be working on the entire pregnancy that will give you more options at the end.
Right.
So, and that was our very first course, was how to avoid an unnecessary cesarean, was to prevent cesareans that didn't need to happen, as well as the trauma that happens around birth, sometimes the first time around, because we keep our head in the sand.
Right.
And not understanding how our medical system is set up and letting somebody else dictate all of your medical decisions for you and your baby, and literally your maternal health care, is making a choice. And the choice is, I'm going to be a victim and you be in charge. And the falsity of that is we think, well, they don't want to get sued, so they're going to give me the best possible advice. The false part about that is that you sign so many waivers that covers their ass. So literally, you're trying to be a victim so that you don't have to take responsibility, and you're thinking someone else is taking all responsibility, but it really is all your responsibility.
Right.
And if you understand that from the beginning, things just shift to where you enjoy your pregnancy, you look forward to labor, you're excited to connect with your baby, you're excited to be with your partner, and you set up postpartum support so that you thrive.
Right. Right.
And so that's the first part. The second part, if you just take a online class where there's no interaction, so I'm just going to watch module, no interaction, no talking, no questions answered, you're going to be missing a lot of pieces. If there is a group call where you can ask those questions, or a way to contact the educator, then yes, that's a fantastic option. That's why we like to teach live, because yes, you might be doing homework during the week and watching some mini videos, or we have some homework for you to be doing and talking conversations to have, but the face-to-face is where we connect everything together. And I think that's why the live classes have worked, and why parents are really enjoying them, because the bits of information that they get ahead of time, they write their questions down, and then we have a thorough discussion, and we can individualize, oh, what's happening at your hospital? Oh, you're birthing at home. And oh, the birth center said this. So they get the perspective from doctors, midwives, and home birth midwives, which makes them also know that they have different options. And so several people have been switching. Our home birth population right now is fantastic, and our birth center population, because families don't want to risk going into where all the sick people are.
Right.
And also risk that if they have COVID, they'll be by themselves.
Yeah.
And now they're birthing alone with no doula and no partner support.
Right.
So that has been a blessing with the pandemic, because people have to get more educated when they're birthing at birth centers and at home.
Right. With the dynamic though, you said, like, are you finding that group Q&A works better, or is more valuable, or contributes more than individual Q&A with an instructor, because you're getting instead of just your answers or your questions being answered, that you're hearing all these other different things as well?
Absolutely. I always prefer to do, over private classes, I always prefer group classes. For one, the partners get the support, right?
Yeah.
Because they don't have it normally. Like, they're working, they're doing their thing. Birthing people have built-in support. That's what our system is set up for. So when they're in a group environment, they're going to hear different things. They're like, oh, I never thought about that. And same with birthing parents, when they're hearing other people say, here's what my provider said, and then I answer that, and the next week they walk into their OB and their OB says the exact same thing, because they always say that. They have a script, I swear, they memorize in medical school, and they say the same thing, and then they go, I can say no to that. And they might say no to that, right? Because they've already heard it. And and I have that time and time again in class, when they're with a certain kind of provider, or a provider that I personally know. I know what's coming up at 36 weeks. I know the script they're going to say. And I can just say, and I don't necessarily direct it as an enemy thing. It's just be aware that here's what's going to be said. Here's why. And here are your choices. For example, I had a family call me yesterday, and their OB, who's been fantastic, which is why they didn't switch to a home birth. And I knew who this OB was. And the OB said, oh, well, now you're 41 weeks, we're inducing today. Today is the day. And they were kind of confused. They're like, wait a second, everything's okay. Well, yes, but. And then there was a whole list of this and this. And the dad said, well, I have a question. If this was your wife, oh, we'd go straight to C-section. I wouldn't take these risks. And the dad sat there and he thought about that. And he was like, but yet he's letting us go home. So it's not an imminent risk. And the only reason it's today is because tomorrow and the other day are both filled up with induction appointments. So they have 2 slots open today. So today's the imminent risk. And they backed up enough to start asking questions, but then they also went back to the classes that we've held and the Q&As that we've held. And they were like, oh my gosh, we knew this was happening. We just didn't think it was going to happen to us.
Right.
So they were more prepared to kind of scale things back, get a second opinion, etc. They wouldn't have gotten that if it was just a private class of here's what typically happens and you're okay. And, or if they had just taken it online and it was just, we watched it together. Birth has so many intricate little pieces that need to be woven for your particular birthing environment, birthing experience, perhaps special needs you guys have, that it's important to have somebody educated to help weave those little bits together.
Right.
And you may have a doula that can do that. And that's another reason to have a doula, because they can answer questions that come up in class that are going to be specific to you. Plus you have the support that's going to help you work through that.
Right.
But part of birth is knowing your options and being autonomous enough to make the choices for you and your baby instead of being intimidated by authority figures.
Right.
And, you know, as an educator, I could be an authority figure. As a doctor, midwife, all nurses, they're all authority figures. However, they are human beings that can have conversations with you. And what birthing parents don't realize is that you're hiring all of us as your support.
Yeah.
You can fire us at any minute, and you can ask us to leave the room at any minute. And that's your choice. That's your right. And you're going to learn that in a good course.
Right.
You know, you can withdraw your consent at any moment. Like you don't want your Pitocin on, you can say, turn it off. I don't want my epidural anymore. Take it out. Like you are in charge of your body. You're in charge of everything that goes on in the birth room and your prenatal appointments.
Right.
And that's what outside education gives you, is that kind of information and options that provider education will not, because they have mass quantities that they have to educate. And if they all do the same thing, it is much easier to manage a mass group of people. Totally understand that. It's also less liability. Totally understand that as a business owner.
Right.
But I'm here for babies. I don't care about that other stuff, you know?
Well, and I think that mindset is really important for parents to understand, is that like you said it, like that you're hiring these people around you to facilitate the birth that you want. And that's a huge shift, just to understand like, oh, I can have it the way that I want. And then understanding all these different choices and options are part of the education. And then you go back to your providers or with your providers and can craft it, which is totally different than showing up and like having the doctor or the nurse telling me what to do, right? Like there's a passivity around that. But I think people that will be listening to this are going to be ones that are actively seeking out information to make the best informed choice for them. And that might include an intervention, and it also might not. But they also might be able to work with those interventions in a way that gives them more power, more choice, and have it be more effective than just going along for the ride and like resenting it and being fearful and having all those negative emotions come into what can be and should be a beautiful birth experience.
Well, and I think that's the fallacy of, I only need birth education if I don't want medication. If it's a natural birth, I need to get educated. But if I'm just going and getting my epidural, why would I take a class? What a waste of time. The doctors and nurses know everything. The problem is they do not know everything. They are not trained on how a mammal gives birth well. And if you walk in with fear, allowing everyone else to make all your choices for you, your body will not move forward because it's scared. Mm-hmm. And as a mammal, your body is protecting its young. That is its number one job, and to protect you. So if you're fearful, everything's going to hold back. I can give you an epidural and numb you from the eyes down. and it's not going to do crap if you're scared.
Yeah.
Because your mind will not allow your body to move forward out of safety precautions. This is built in our system from whenever we got on this planet. And yes, there are ways to work with an epidural that are better for your body than not. There are ways to work with an induction where you're going to have more success or chances of success than not. But you have to understand how your body works, how your mind works, how they work together. And then when we add interventions that interrupt our normal flow and process as a mammal, how that can affect it, what turns those can take, and then what your choices are at that point.
Right.
And that's why we've put out the Induction 101 class, because it's low and slow. And here's what the medications do long-term. Here's what they do short-term. Here's a choice you could make if you waited till you were 7 or 8 centimeters to get your epidural rather than 1 centimeter. And all of the different ways of induction, how to ripen your cervix, what happens with that. We have animations that kind of cover that because we learn through cartoon really well. Probably because that's where we all got our basic Spanish training and all of that from Sesame Street and everything else. And that kind of education gives you power, and it also lets you connect with your baby.
Right.
You make different choices when it's not about you and your pain. 100%. When you're thinking about how is this little boy going to come into the world feeling safe and connected to me?
Yeah.
And a lot of that comes with after birth bonding and knowing what you should request in that hour after baby comes, and to make sure you're at the right hospital that even has it. Right. Sometimes golden hours aren't even offered. And scientifically, we have found that's the best, at least 1 hour, if not more, but that needs to take place for your child.
Right. And that speaks to kind of knowing the end game of what you're looking for and then backtracking it. And you just took it a whole other step further of like, instead of the end game being a certain outcome in a birth, there also is, all right, end game, how are we as a family going to start off as strong and as bonded, as loving and connected as possible? And the birth absolutely affects that afterwards, whether it's physically for the woman, as far as there's more trauma physically and or emotionally to recover from while you're trying to navigate being a mom and keep this baby alive. And then I've done 2 different courses on the effects of birth on baby, their physiology, as well as like the stress in their system and emotions. So that is going to affect bonding as well. So I think to reiterate something you just said, because I think it's so important, is those like birth education is one more than just learning about how to do a natural birth. I think that's a very, very common misconception. And I think that you just spoke to that really well. But another bigger picture, what I'm getting to is a lot of couples, and I say this in my practice, when they're talking about birth education, they're thinking about breathing techniques and laboring techniques.
Yeah.
And learning and birth education, obviously that term says about the birth, but we're talking it as birth educators in the whole perspective. You're talking preconception, first trimester, choosing a team, and we're talking about birth interventions and methods and the like. But now you just open it up into the other side of bonding, starting a family, recovery postpartum, so you can get back to things as a family. And I think that is something I would really like listeners to take to heart, is birth education is new family education, if you will, right?
Absolutely.
It's pregnancy, it's birth, it's postpartum, it's early child development, all of that. And that can be learned about, jumped into, guided for you by the right programs. And that isn't like, so that a class that's offered by the hospital about how to be a good patient and how to like follow those policies. And I say that with obviously some charge on it, but
a little bit of
it
bias we may have.
More. Yeah. To have it expand more so that this new family can be ushered in that healthy, happy way.
Well, and I want parents to take my postpartum classes in the first trimester. First trimester, your boobs are sore, you're super tired, you may be starting to get sick, you're not sure if you're going to miscarry, you're not sure if you're not going to miscarry, you haven't told anybody, you're super nervous, and you're like, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? I want to jump in, but I don't want to get my hopes up. I don't want to attach, but I do want to attach, right? I say attach. I say attach 100% buy-in. And I say that because I had 6 miscarriages and I attached until about the 3rd one. And then I was like, I'm going to lose all these babies. I'm not attaching till they come out. It was my defense thing, right?
Sure.
But now I know as an educator, attach, connect, and start from the beginning. And when we start at the beginning, we need to think about the end first.
Yeah.
Postpartum is your rest of your life. All we talk about in America and in other parts of the world is birth, labor, techniques. Postpartum, I bring my baby home. I'm exhausted. My body physically needs to recover for 2 months. No one told me that because you didn't get educated. What are my best foods to eat for recovery and the replenishment of establishing my blood supply again, my milk supply, having the right postpartum support for breastfeeding issues, to model breastfeeding for me, if that's what I'm choosing to do. If I'm pumping, am I over pumping or not? Because now the hospital gave me the pump and told me pump, and now I have an oversupply and a clogged duct. All of those postpartum things should be learned about, talked about, and planned for starting at 3 months. Understanding how to thrive in the postpartum instead of survive will make a huge difference in how you start your parenting journey off. How do you and your partner connect? Well, that starts at 3 months, planning how we're going to do it afterwards. And I'll tell you the biggest disconnection, and something I always cover when I get a phone call early on, and even in the middle of a pregnancy, during that first trimester, we are sore, we're scared of miscarriage, we're so exhausted. We've never experienced exhaustion like that until the postpartum, then you're going to get it again. But we're super tired and we push our partner away because of all the things. Then in second trimester, we're planning our nursery, we're looking at maternity clothes, we're excited about this baby coming, we're monogramming our stuff, we're working on our work to see how we're going to figure that out in the last trimester, we push our partners away. Third trimester, now we're fat, tired, exhausted. We're really finishing up work and we're trying to take birth classes and we push our partners away again. Partners connect to us intimately. And now we have pushed them away for 6-7 months. And this does not just male-female relationships. It's all partners, all genders, everything. It's just what we do. And then we are in postpartum recovery and we have to push them off for another 3 to 4 months because our boobs leak. We've had whatever kind of birth we've had, and we don't feel comfortable. And now we expect them to cook, clean, protect, provide, bond with the baby. And they do not feel connected. And they're trying, and we're giving them a bunch of trauma as well. Early connection with our partners, and then knowing what we're going to need to do afterwards, after this baby shows up or babies show up, is key to keeping our relationship strong. And having those connections and those conversations and that sex all along, because the more sex we have and the more orgasms we have with that person, or people, whatever we're doing, those are the pheromones and the hormones that are coming out of our bodies through labor and through pregnancy. And that's how our partners will connect during the birth process and afterwards to bond with that baby when those pheromones are pouring out of that baby's head. We are literally priming on a subconscious, intimate, instinctual level the bonding that needs to be taking place afterwards with our babies and our future postpartum. We learn that if we take our postpartum classes early.
Right. Makes so much sense. And thank you for talking about the partners as well, because I do a lot of work with specifically dads. I have the new dads class, and talking about like things to do that if you haven't crafted it together, which is obviously the best way, and asking your partner, what do you want me to do? Because if I'm speaking specifically to dads and guys, that thing is like, I'll do whatever you want. Just tell me what to do. And then moms are mad because like, you shouldn't have to ask me what to do, just do it. And that disconnect gets worse and worse and worse. So if we can have couples on board from the beginning and then have those tools of, I got this, there's going to be knowing each other's roles is really important, as well as the things, but then having, again, like you spoke really well about that postpartum being the end game of what do I want it to look like 3 months after the baby is, and painting that picture. And then how do we move backwards to make sure all of that, loveliness that we want to post online happening actually
That's
shows up
half
rather
fake
than
anyway.
it's so true. So in our closing moments, like what would you recommend to a listener that is somewhere, regardless of where they are in their birth education journey, whether they just peed on the stick, they haven't peed on a stick, they're waiting to, or they're getting close to the birth, what's your advice to them right now?
Well, get education. Like whatever you can get for free, get it. The very first thing that I put out was the unnecessary cesarean class. And the reason being is because it's going to cover education, providers, your environment, how you're a mammal, those, and picturing what your baby wants. If you can get that picture early, things start to shift. Options are going to start to come to you, and you're going to feel what your baby wants for their birth. Because gosh, dang it, it's their birth. It's not our birth. And the baby should be the forefront. So I would start with that class, of course, because I made it, and it's free, and it's always going to be free. And that's on Instagram, and it's on our website. But then start early. If you're coming into this podcast a month before you have the baby, then your obligation, your duty, your job, and to be a kind human being, anybody that you know that gets pregnant now, get them to get into education right from the beginning. The sooner, the better. Nice. You'll wherever you come into the process and you get this bit of information, help somebody else. And that's when we do a lot of our birth recording, birth stories, especially for second-time families. That's the one thing they say is, I tell everyone, because I don't want anyone to have the tragedy I had on my first birth. And it was totally preventable. 100% of what happened was preventable because they weren't autonomous. They didn't take any responsibility. And I was going to do the exact same thing before I had a baby. So I understand that fear of, here, you do everything. I even had an RN friend that said, I'll be your doula. I'll just keep hitting the epidural button. You'll be so numb, you won't even be able to feel. And that sounded great to me. But I would have handed over the most beautiful, powerful experience of my life. And I found that through education. That's what gave me the options to go, oh, I could be in water. I could labor like this. I could eat and drink what I wanted. Because physiologically, how you support your body makes a huge difference in how whether it's medicated or non-medicated, how your baby comes into the world. Right. You're going to learn that in out of hospital education.
Okay.
So, and there's books to read, there's conversations to have. Oh my goodness. I can give you lists of things, but one thing is, if say I'm not due for 7 months, right now is when you should research your birth class. Right now is when you should hold your spot for that birth class, because you need to be planning your showers and all that kind of stuff in your work and whatever you're going to be doing. Now you're going to plan it around the most important piece, which is education.
Yeah, that's key. And I think too, like understanding how the whole picture of things is so much bigger than just that end game. That's like, well, my due date isn't for a while, so I'll take care of it then because I've got so many other things to do. Like taking a bigger picture of things and finding that what serves you and serves your baby and serves your family really well from the get-go, because it's the most important thing in the world, right? Bringing a baby into the world and doing it the best way that you know how to. And I think that speaks to what we hear as birth educators or people that are taking care of people in birth, is we hear all the time, oh my gosh, I wish I knew this before. I just didn't know. And that's something that I feel you and I care all the time of, like, gosh, we hear that so much. Like, how do we get it so that they never say that they knew in advance? And we do a lot. Obviously, you're doing a ton, like putting out all this content that you are to catch them as early as possible. But I think you hit the nail on the head, is that if you know of somebody that just became pregnant, like share what you know and what you wish you knew with them and point them in the right directions.
Absolutely. And even if they want a medicated birth, even if you want a medicated birth, you have so many options, so many options. And if you don't know, that's what you'll regret, because you will find out and you will kick yourself.
Right.
And that's the part that hurts my heart the most, is I can't get people preconception, because then I can say, what are you scared of and why? And let's work through your fears. And that makes a huge difference to have that fear support. It's a huge, huge difference. And I was terrified. I mean, my mom told me that I would die in childbirth. She said the pain would kill me. She said, if I couldn't do a natural birth, there's no way you can. And I thought, I'm going to die. And then that's why I didn't invite her. I didn't want her to see me die. I was like, well, then I am unexcusing you, because you will not see that. And obviously I don't want that energy in the room. No. But your body is really powerful, and it's growing this baby a full 10 months without any schedule and nobody doing one thing. It has some innate knowledge that nobody can teach you.
Right.
And if somebody can show you what that power can do, and how this baby can come into the world just as magically, no matter what the circumstances, even if there are special circumstances, it can still be beautiful. You need to find that.
Beautiful, Care. Thank you so much for being here. I'm going to put all your links, like to the birtheducationcenter.com, your Instagram, all that stuff in the show notes. So you listening can connect with Care and connect with her resources. You have you said about how to prevent the unnecessary C-section. There's courses that you're putting together with, like, oh my gosh, I'm pregnant now, and birth education and all this stuff. It's amazing. So go to the website, find out those resources. And again, Care, thank you so much for being here. I love talking with you, and I love that we get to record this conversation so other people get to listen to it.
I feel the same way. I need to start interviewing you and get your good magic on podcast.
Well, that's a good idea. Maybe we'll do that.
Maybe we'll do that.
Okay. Take good care, Care. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
And don't forget, I have 2 free offers for both moms and dads. First, for the moms, I have my 40 ways of connecting with your baby during pregnancy that you can get on my website at drjwarren.com/40ways. That's 40 ways. And for the dads, I have the 9 myths about becoming a dad that is also available on my site at drjwarren.com/9 myths. That's the number 9 myths. So both moms and dads are covered. Go check them out. I hope you enjoy them.